Hi, this is Paul Zelizer, and welcome to another episode of the Awarepreneurs podcast. This podcast is all about the intersection of three things: conscious business, social impact, and awareness practices. Each week, I do a deep dive interview with a thought leader in this intersection, somebody who has market-tested experience and is already transforming many lives. Before we get into today's show and I talk about our topic and our guest, I want to ask you a favor. It really helps if you could go to iTunes or whatever podcast app you're listening to, search for Awarepreneurs, and give us a rating and a review. It helps our guests reach more people, this message get out there, this community grow, and the whole idea of doing business from a deep and transformative place get into more people's consciousness. So thanks for giving that a go. Today, I am super thrilled to interview Stephanie Callahan, and our topic today is when you've been off kilter, returning to a business that fits your goals and your energy levels. Quick word about Stephanie. Stephanie is a business vision catalyst who works with purpose-driven entrepreneurs. She used to be in corporate and had a very successful career there until she realized she was risking her own health and well-being and traveling and running big teams and being all over the place. And her psyche and her body kind of conspired and said, Stephanie, you got to do something else. As a matter of fact, she says she got so sick that she had to quit everything back in 2009. This show is about what she learned and how she works now and how she helps other people grow businesses in a way that really fits their goals and their energy levels. Stephanie, welcome to the Awarepreneurs Show.
Oh, Paul, I am so excited to have this conversation with you today. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, you're welcome. So I'd like to start every show, Stephanie, with the question of what's one wellness or awareness practice that you personally use that helps you navigate these poignant times, what's up in the collective, what's up in your body, what's up in your family. You know, you're a woman who holds a lot. What's something that helps you feel resourced?
I have a lot of different things that I do that help me feel resourced that I've added to my own repertoire over time. And I'm sure we're probably going to share a few of them in today's conversation. What I shared with you shortly before we started this show was how I start my day. And I think maybe we'll start there in that I have never been known as a morning person. I have never been known as somebody that just jumps out of bed with a lot of energy. And so I wanted to find a way that I could move into the day with intention. And I found something that works really well for me and really well because my husband has a tendency to have his alarm go off about 2 hours before I ever have any intention of getting out of bed. And what I do is become really intentional with that time. I don't go back to sleep. I spend time in meditation and prayer and visioning for the day. And one of the things that I do in ending that time is I have a conversation with God, just asking very intentionally that every individual that I come in contact with, whether it's face-to-face or virtually or through a recording, that I'm a blessing with how I am presenting myself and the knowledge that I share. And that prayer works in a couple different ways for me. One, it's a real reminder for me of who I want to be in my day as I step out of bed and get ready for my day and feed the dog and do all those other regular domestic things that I do before I start my workday.
Nice. And help us understand, Stephanie, our audience. So before you do what you do now, this work with vision-driven entrepreneurs, purpose-driven entrepreneurs, you had a really dynamic corporate career. Give people a little context of that work.
Sure. So yeah, before starting Callahan Solutions, I lived in the northern Chicago suburbs, and I worked for a corporate consulting firm. My clients were Fortune 50 clients, and I traveled all over the U.S. I had a team anywhere from 250 to 375, give and take at different times in different projects, associates that I led. Our world of work was software development for human resource functions within large Fortune 50 firms. So there was a tremendous amount of stress and pressure that went along with that work. When I was hired into the firm, I was told that I would average at least 50 to 60 hours a week, and that was not during the busy time. So there were instances where I was feasibly working 80 to 90 hours a week. And I had gotten myself before leaving to a point that wasn't very healthy because I felt guilty if the sun was out and I wasn't working.
Hmm.
So I, you alluded in your introduction to me that there was just this internal thing going on with me, right? There was lots of money, there was lots of prestige, there was lots of travel, which people that don't travel thought was really exotic and glorious, and I found it kind of tedious and draining. So difference of opinion with people, but when I left that world of work, I had all kinds of people that thought I was crazy because they thought I had hit this, glorious mother load of, oh my goodness, look at her. I moved up in the company very quickly, lots of promotions and, pay increases and that kind of thing. But part of me lost me in the process,
Hmm.
and I wasn't okay with that. And I ultimately decided to leave that job through a couple different life occurrences, if you will. My son at the time was a baby when I started thinking about leaving, and there was this point in the middle of the night where I had gotten up and I was, feeding him and kind of cuddling with him. We had a rocking chair in his room at the time, and I was just sitting with him. And often when I'd have those moments with him, I think about, who would I like him to be when he grows up? Who would I want to raise him to be? What type of person would I want to raise him to be? And I was having this conversation with myself and a conversation with him, and kind of came to what I call the blinding flash of the obvious that occurred in that moment, where I realized that, he's going to watch me a lot more than listen to me. The way that I live and how I carry myself and the interactions I have and the choices that I make are going to be very impactful to him. And in that moment, I realized that the only reason that I was still in that corporate career was because of the really big paycheck.
Hmm.
And what came to me at the time was, I'm selling myself. And that felt so ugly and so not who I was. And but I was a workaholic at the time, and that was a moment. And then there was another moment where I took a day off and I traveled 3.5 hours south to a university to do some recruiting. Now, just to I want to highlight something there, in that I said I took a day off and then I went and recruited for the firm. That's kind of
That
how
says a
it
lot, right?
worked, right? Yeah. And when I left the firm, I had loads and loads of vacation time banked up too. Time off didn't happen. We when they hired me on, they warned me that it was going to be a lot of hours, and it was. But with every job offer that I made to those soon to be college grads, I felt guilty. I'm like, this is weird. I shouldn't feel guilty for offering a job to somebody, right? I'm like, that's not the way it should be. And I did. And then I remember walking from the Career Services Center to the parking lot where my car was, and it was fall. It was October. And I remember looking around at the leaves, and I remember just, right? Like the first time in probably years that I had taken a real breath, and it kind of felt good. And then that moment with my son came to my mind. And on the drive home, on a very straight, I live in Illinois, so everything's really straight and flat. I don't have a lot of views to look at as I was driving home, so a lot of thinking time. And on my ride home that day, I called my husband and said, what would you think if I left my job? And he knew what had been going on. He says, if that's what you need to do, then let's figure out how to make it happen. And literally 3.5, 4 months later, I quit my job, he quit his job, and we moved to where we live now. It was a very, very fast transition, and one that I look back on and say, gosh, I'm glad I made that choice. I'm glad I listened to what my body was trying to tell me.
Nice. So you left the corporate world of lots of travel, big paychecks, big teams, no time off, constantly running, right? And
Yeah.
what happened next?
Well, I thought I thought I was going to be starting this business that would give me all kinds of freedom, and I was going to work with people that I wanted to work with. And at the time, I thought I wanted to start my own firm. Right at the time, I thought I was going to have employees, but the model was going to be different. It was going to be a virtual work environment, which back then was not a thing. Now it's a thing. Back then, that was really visionary thinking. People didn't do that. You went to a physical location, and what I didn't realize at the time that I now recognize is that I was addicted to work. I was addicted to overworking, and I was a workaholic. So I mentioned earlier that I felt guilty if the sun was out and I was still in the office in that corporate environment. I hadn't healed that when I started my own business. So when I started my own business, I got all jazzed and really excited about all these things that I could do that I wasn't able to do when I was in the corporate space. So I come from a family that has this beautiful legacy of community service and giving back. And that was something that I wasn't really able to have the capacity to do when I worked in the corporate space. And so I had moved to a new location, toddler in tow with my husband, but new community, new home, baby, he was still in diapers, and new business. And oh, by the way, I'm also going to take on being a CASA, a court appointed special advocate for kids that are removed from their home, legally removed from their home. And a CASA is someone that speaks on behalf of the child in the courtroom. I took that on. I decided to go through training and become a rape crisis counselor, where I had a pager, and every weekend if the pager went off, I was rushing in the middle of the night to the hospital to do advocacy work for women, and actually occasionally men, that had been sexually assaulted. And a number of other things. I joined a number of different groups, a number of different networking groups, because I had to get out there, right? I had to get my business known. And I was always taught that if you're going to be a part of something, you should be really a part of it and really get all in. So I was on 4 or 5 different boards of different organizations. And can you hear the workaholism coming out and all that?
My poor introverted
Right?
nervous system is like,
Right?
oh my gosh.
And now I'll tell you, I'm a highly sensitive introvert. I am not an extrovert. I am a highly, highly sensitive introvert. So there was this push-pull going on in my body of, Stephanie, you need to give to yourself. But at the time, I'm in a workaholic state. I'm in a people-pleasing state. I'm in a perfectionistic state. All of those things I'm recovering from now, right? I don't say I'm 100%. I'm a recovering workaholic, right? But I had all those things going on, and I hadn't learned to fully love me. So I was always trying to prove myself. So even though I was a highly sensitive introvert, I always put myself last, like always put myself at the very bottom. And that came at a cost. That came at an extreme cost. That all that kind of culminated into what I would call this perfect storm, where I had gotten out of one hamster wheel of the corporate world and running and running and running. And I had created a whole new trap for myself in this business that I created. And I had nobody to hold accountable but myself. I created that all on my own. There are some people that when they start their business, their spouse or their significant other gives them lots and lots of pressure to perform very quickly. I wasn't in that spot. The only person that made what happen is me. And I hit a wall and got very, very ill. So much so that I was told in 2009 that I wouldn't see 2010. And it was a wake-up call for me. And so at that point, I had to switch some pretty significant gears so that I'd be here to be able to talk to you today.
Thank you for sharing that story. I know we have, I don't know how many, Stephanie, we have quite a few listeners. We've had a scholarship program or a social impact program where people can apply to be part of the Awarepreneurs community. And we understand that, even at our affordable rates for that community, people are in all kinds of different situations. And there must be at least a dozen of our listeners who have either they themselves had or continue to struggle with really severe physical issues of some kind. We're talking cancer, we're talking about, really intense chronic fatigue or environmental illness or things, migraines to the point where like people are really struggling to work, not even a 40-hour week, let alone an 80 or 100-hour week.
Right.
So, talk to us about that moment. With that, we don't need all the gory details, but when you say you're really sick, I mean, you were really sick. Give our listeners a snapshot of the kind of illness or the kind of limitation, that's a better word, that you're facing.
So when I left my corporate world, one of the things that I really wanted to be able to do was be a very involved and intentional parent and spouse. And when 2009 rolled around, it was, and it had been culminating for years, right? I had gotten to the point where my son at that time was in second grade, and he took care of me more than I took care of him. I'd spend a lot of time on the couch during the day while he was at school, trying to sleep and build up energy, but I also had this business that I was trying to run, and I hadn't really fully healed myself. So I'd work on a client and then I'd nap, and then I'd work on a client and then I'd nap, and then I'd work on a client and then I'd nap. And I was still very much in this pushing mode. But by the time he would get home from school, I was sapped. Like there was nothing left. And he would come home and he would come and give me a hug as I laid on the couch. And then in that evening, just to kind of give you an idea, my husband would be home 6 o'clock-ish, and he'd cook dinner, and I wouldn't have enough energy to come to the table to eat with the family. My son would cut it up like a toddler, and he'd come to the couch and he'd feed me. Sorry, that kind of got me. That memory is still really hard for me. And I mentioned to you earlier that he had to grow up really fast, and that wasn't what I visioned for him. And one of the first things that I had to do through this entire experience was realize that, okay, this is what it is, and I can't go back and change any of this. So what am I going to do to address what's going on and deal with reality and figure out a solution? And the first thing I did actually, Paul, was I fired every doctor I had. Because I had been getting sick. Like 2009 it was a surprise, but it wasn't a surprise. It was kind of like the last straw, right? I had been getting continually more ill. Now, hindsight being 2020, we have since learned that kind of the end all be all of everything that caused all of this medical stuff in our life was because our home that we had moved to, that was supposed to be, our escape from the corporate space. The builder had not built the home properly. And there were 4 types of toxic mold, including black mold, that were growing behind walls, underneath subflooring, nowhere we could see it, smell it, had no idea that it was going on, and no idea that we were being slowly poisoned by our house. Now, we didn't learn that until 2 years ago. But at the time, I fired all my doctors, in this 2009 timeframe, I fired all my doctors. And I actually found, and I feel so phenomenally blessed that I found him. I found a holistic health practitioner that would listen to me, because these doctors weren't listening. They plied me with all kinds of drugs, many of them that made me feel worse and made me really, really exist and not live in my life. And anytime I told them what was going on, they didn't believe me. They didn't listen to me. They couldn't hear me. They kept saying, well, that can't be true. And then they give me more drugs. And I didn't like that solution at all. And so I found this holistic practitioner through a recommendation from a very dear friend. And he listened to me. He really, really listened to me. And he said, okay, if that's your truth, if that's what's going on, then we've got to figure out what's making it happen. And we became sleuths, we became detectives. And it was a real partnering with this individual. And not only did he listen to me when I told him what was going on in my life, but he listened and allowed me to listen to my own body too. He allowed me to, he'd say, well, it could be this or this. What do you think it is? And then I'd learned how to listen to my body. I learned how to really deeply get back in touch again, something that I had lost for years. And I could say, well, I think we should go this route first. So it was a real true, there was science behind it, but there was also a lot of intuition behind it as well. And I will be forever grateful for him because he saved my life. And I changed so many things in my life. I learned how to rest. I learned how to sleep, which there's a difference between the two. I learned how to really, truly listen to myself again. I had known how to do that when I was younger, and I'd kind of forgotten it. I think we're conditioned out of listening to ourselves. And sometimes we're conditioned into listening to those gurus, all those specialists that I hired that were making me worse, that for a long time, I thought, well, they have to be right. They're the ones that went to school, right?
Yeah.
I learned how to eat differently because it turns out I have a number of food allergies I didn't know I had. And I was open to trying really weird things. Weird to me at the time, now very common, right? Now I meditate. That was weird to me back then, Paul. Sitting still? I didn't know how to sit still. I had no clue how to sit still for 5 minutes, much less, the times that I do now.
Nice.
And I think there's a lot of people that have been conditioned out of being still, out of that quiet time. And I think that while all that experience was very difficult, it was a very huge blessing to have that experience, because today, the work that I do and the life that I live is so much more rich because I was forced into that time of silence.
Nice. And I want to point out, we wanted to establish some street cred, and, being on the couch and being unable to get to the table to have dinner with your family, I think we've done that. But I want to say that we also talked before we turned on the recording that the title is When You've Been Off Kilter, not necessarily that you've had a physical illness. We have a whole community of more empathetic human beings, a lot of whom are struggling on many levels, not just physically. If you're listening to this and you don't have a physical illness, I want to say we see you and you're welcome here, especially since 2016. The emotional and spiritual concern and sense of urgency, and the way that can sort of override our sense of just like daily, wait, you want me to send out a marketing newsletter? Like our entire country here in the US might be going down a fascist route, and I'm here worried about sending out my newsletter? Being off kilter comes in many forms, is what I'm trying to say. And we wanted to give our listeners a sense of your particular form, but both you and I agreed before we turned on the recording that there are many ways to be off kilter, and that's showing up in many manifestations now. Is that fair to say, Stephanie?
Absolutely. And I had my own form of off kilter in the last couple years. Off kilter can be because of health issues like what I experienced, but off kilter comes in so many different ways. Off kilter can come because of what's happening politically around you. I mean, I think regardless of what your political persuasion is, and regardless of whether you live in the US or elsewhere, I think in the last few years, there's been a lot more heightened energy, and a lot of it not that great, that can take us totally off kilter, especially for those of us that are highly sensitive people. Or you could have life experiences of people that you love happen, or you could have relationship things happen. Off kilter shows up in so many different ways, and it's all real. There's not one that's worse than the other, because it's your experience, it's your off kilterness, right? I think I just made a word.
I like your word.
I think I just made a word. I kind of like it. It's your off kilterness. And I think sometimes we rather than honoring where we are and whatever it is that's throwing us off, we're saying, well, but so-and-so has it so much worse, so I should be able to handle this. And all that is guilting yourself, right? One of the things that I encourage my clients and my friends that are going through stuff like this is, understand all the elements that got you off kilter in the first place. And recognize them and honor them. Don't try to force them away. Don't, try to joy them away. There's a space for joy and gratitude, and I practice that every single day. That's a part of my morning routine is a gratitude practice. But there's also a reality of honoring wherever it is that you are right now, and whatever process you need to do to move through that. And you could get advice from other people and what's worked for them, but you can also be very true to yourself to say that particular experience or that particular way of handling things sounds really good to me and aligned to me, or you know what? I'm glad that worked for you, but that just doesn't feel right for me. And standing in your own personal power when you're in your off-kilterness, to be able to identify solutions that are going to work the best for you. And as you're understanding all the elements that got you off kilter, also taking some time to get real and align yourself and understand what part did you create in all of that, and are you ready to let it go? Because I mentioned earlier, right, that all this stuff that I created early in my business that wasn't really health related, it was more stress induced that caused some of the health stuff. I created that. And if I didn't own my part in that creation, I didn't put the mold in my walls. That was something that we moved into. But I did create the environment that weakened my immune system. Now, that's not blame. I'm not blaming myself. I'm not angry at myself. I've done all the forgiveness work around that. But it is accountability to say, okay, if I created this, then I can uncreate it too, right? And that's empowering. That's really empowering, because you say, okay, that's what I knew, and I did the best with what I could with where I was at the time. Now, what do I want to do differently? How do I intentionally want to move forward with what I face? And that's what allowed me to fire all my doctors and do something that in my family structure was considered weird. I even had family members that told me I hired a witch doctor. That happily I can say later on down the line, as I was getting better, came back and said, mea culpa, you were right. You did the right thing. But I had a lot of resistance from people that loved me when I went down that path originally. But I also, through that whole healing process, completely revamped my entire business and said, I want a business that feeds me.
Nice. And I want to cover that. Let's do this, Stephanie. Let's take a break, and we have a short commercial. And then when we come back, I want to hear specifically about what you've learned about creating a business that fits your goals and energy levels. And it's something you've become quite well known at doing with your clients. Before I do that, I want to put in a pitch. I've taken over sponsoring this podcast. We had a sponsor for many years, or for many episodes, I should say, about a year and a half. But I've wanted to do this for a long time. And what I'm offering is, when people are in a place of not knowing how to market their business with more ease, I've developed an offering called the Easeful Marketing Plan, where you can sit down, we'll spend an hour, we'll look at what's going on and how could you get word out there about what you're doing in a way that's not about push, it's not about ego, that you can do in an ongoing way. It doesn't feel overwhelming, feels relaxed, and it's effective. I call it the Easeful Marketing Plan, and it's specifically for entrepreneurs that have both depth and the desire to bring about social change in the work that they're doing. It's $99, and you really get a sense of what you can do in an ongoing way that'll help grow your business. You'll leave with a plan, some really clear strategies of something you can do 2 to 3 times a week max that really will help you grow your business, who you're talking to, and what the exact strategies are. So if you're interested, it's called the Easeful Marketing Plan, and you can go to paulzelizer.com/easeful-marketing. So, All right, Stephanie, let's come back and let's talk about this part of returning to a business that fits your goals and energy levels. We got a sense it got really bad and you learned a lot about rebooting self-care and learning how to rethink kind of how you use your energy and what you can do as a human being and still live a sustainable life. Talk to us about how did that start to translate into working with clients who maybe struggled with similar kind of issues?
You know, what I find is that there's a tremendous number of people that start their business with these really wonderful intentions. Either they want more freedom in their life, or they have this really fantastic mission that a message that they want to get out in the world, or this amazing ability to heal other people. You know, a lot of really altruistic, wonderful, impactful, meaningful reasons that they start their business. And then they listen to guru number one, and they listen to guru number two. And before they know it, this business that they thought they were building has become really more of a job than a mission and a calling. So whether the people are struggling with health issues or what have you, they're off kilter in an off balance and out of alignment. And the work that I do with those clients is to help them get back in alignment, but back in alignment from a business perspective. So I mentioned earlier, you know, get real. What part did you create, and what are you ready to let go? So there's internal stuff that happens when we're off kilter. And yes, we have all kinds of external things that could help initiate that off kilterness, but how we respond to being off kilter matters just as much. So there's internal work that we can do around our being and our doing. And I like, you know, one of my worlds of work has always been around productivity and effectively using the time that you have so that you have a time for life. But it's a little differently implemented from the perspective that a lot of productivity consultants will talk about that to-do list. And I talk about that to-do list, but I also talk about the to-be list. And that's the intention around what happens in waking up in your day and knowing exactly who you want to be. I want to be loving. I want to be understanding. I want to be forgiving. You know, whatever type of adjective comes to you. I want to be empowering. I want to be powerful. With this audience, I know they're all going to be really good words that people would intentionally want to be. And then you apply that to your doing. When you do that, what you're choosing and the activities that you choose start to shift. And so the first step that I encourage people to do when they're in this off-kilter state is to take an inventory of what's going on in their life and what things are they shooting themselves to death with. I have to do this. I have to do this. You probably don't. I mean, there are some things that you do, right? If there's health things going on, or if you have family members you're taking care of, there are things that are out of your control that you need to figure out how to work in. But what I've found is that there's a lot of activities that we build into our business because we've listened to external forces that we think we have to do to be successful, that we really don't. When I redesigned my business, I actually slowed down and I eliminated all kinds of stuff from my business. I was a little nervous about that, but I was kind of forced into it, right? My business tripled, Paul. And what my clients find is that when they get really aligned with what they want and how they want to deliver it, then their business grows rather than shrinks. And so one of the first steps is just to get real, not only with what you've created, but then what do you want instead? What do you really want? So I mentioned that I was a workaholic, right? That I'm now a recovering workaholic. And one of the things that I acknowledged to myself was that I wanted to work less. And I felt so guilty about that when I said it, because I felt like there was something wrong for me for wanting to work less. I come from the Midwest. We are hard working stock in the Midwest, right. Okay? For those of you that don't know the Midwest, we are raised to be hard workers. That's kind of a part of the cultural collaborative that happens in the Midwest. So there was some divorcing that I needed to do. I literally divorced myself from hard work because it wasn't helping me. It was really hurting me. And so if you get really clear on what it is that you really, really want, then you can start getting strategic about how to make that happen. So I can happily say today that my business model and many of my clients' business models are built around that. So I go part-time in the summer. I was raised by two teachers. I learned, they took the summer off. Well, kind of. They did other things, but I grew up with that, and I'm like, I really kind of like that. How can I build a business model that allows me to work more in the winter months, where I'm in Illinois, it's cold and wet and yucky, and I'm not a snow person. So having all kinds of work time in the winter is perfectly fine by me. But when it's really nice out and I can go hiking and I can be in my garden, I want to spend more time doing that. So I've built a business model that allows me to do that. But it had to start with me claiming what I wanted. And my clients do the same thing in getting really, really clear about what is it that they want in life, whether that's more travel time, whether that's more time to practice their healthcare regimens if they are having some kind of health crisis going on, whether that's more time on the golf course or more time getting massages, whatever those things are. Being honest about here's what I want and here's what it would take to make it happen. And then saying, okay, strategically, what type of work can I put in place? What kind of work product, whether it's a physical product, a virtual product, or a service that you can put in place to help you create that life that you want. What I frequently see is people that have these arbitrary ideas of, well, I'll live life when I make this income level, or I'll live life when I make that income level. And what happens when you work it that way is you learn to overwork. You learn to push and push and push. And some people end up in a situation like I did, where their body just wasn't going to push anymore. Other people end up in situations where their relationships struggle, or they reach a plateau in their business because their subconscious is saying, enough already, right? Where when you can build your business in alignment with what you really want and with your goals, things don't have to push anymore. Then you get into flow, and it works so much better in that way.
Nice. So where would you, if somebody's listening and they're shaking their head, Stephanie, and they're saying, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. I really want this. I've maybe not been caring for my well-being as much as I like in my business, or I've been off kilter. And I want to start to move in that direction. And everything Stephanie is saying is totally resonating. And it feels like, oh my gosh, how do I get from where I am off kilter to that life and configuration of my business that has that feeling that Stephanie's talked about? Where would you suggest somebody start?
I think you really start by being really clear with where you are and what you like about that and what you don't like about that. I think you get really clear about what's taking you off kilter, right? So if your off kilter has been in response to some of the political things that have been showing up in the last couple of years, and some of the human rights things that have been showing up in the last few years, you look at that and you don't ignore it, because it's important stuff, right? But you also say, if I stay totally focused on whatever's taken me off kilter, am I really going to be able to make a difference? Now, my answer to that question was no, I'm not, because I'm so off kilter that I'm not really all that good to anybody else, right? And so it's a matter of looking at those different elements and deciding where is it that you can get yourself back to a more balanced state so that you can build yourself up and fill yourself up so that you can then move forward and actually make the big difference that you're meant to make. So that could be looking at the business model you have and the things that you're delivering. When we're in an off-kilter state, everything that was only kind of working becomes a bigger deal, right? So we could be putting up with business systems that don't work for us, or we could be putting up with clients that drain us a little, or we could be putting up with service delivery models or services or programs that we really don't like that much, but we're making money, so hey, we'll keep doing them. put up with those things. And then when we're thrown off kilter, all of those things seem to magnify, right? So you look at those things that are being magnified and you say, what can I tweak? Even if it's a small tweak, because sometimes we have to take baby steps until we can take bigger steps. But a bunch of baby steps equal huge changes. So never belittle or never look down on any baby step you take. And one of my favorite quotes around that is, little hinges swing big doors. Right?
Nice. I love that.
You know, I have a couple sets of French doors in my office. And anytime I say that, I think about that, because these doors are really big, and there's these little tiny pieces of metal that swing these really big doors. So when you're looking and when you're off kilter, you don't have to make these really huge, big monstrosity thing changes, you know, because I talked about, I redesigned my entire business. That's a big deal, but you don't have to do that. And that may not be your path. So look at those things that are magnified and say, okay, what's one step I can take today? And then tomorrow, what's one step I can take today? And then the next day, what's one step I can take today? And you'll be amazed at how many miles those steps take you with just taking one step. And if you have the capacity in that day to take 2 steps, take 2 steps, right? But it could look different depending on the type of off-kilterness you have and the types of things that got you to that off-kilterness. I have one client that got to a really off-kilter state because she had decided that she had to travel for her business. She had decided the only way that she would make clients is if she got on the stage and she spoke. Except for the fact that travel was not very conducive to her personality. She was an introvert, and all that time around all these people, she didn't have the time to recharge, and she was a mom and actually wanted to be home with her son. And so the way that manifested, the way that ended up showing itself, is that she was agitated frequently. The world just seemed to be very frustrating to her. Excuse me. And her sales started to dip. And by the time I talked with her, she had had 7 months with no sales. So she's aggravated, she's traveling, she's not the type of mom she wants, and she's not making money.
Oh, no.
Right? It's oh, wow, you've created this perfect storm here. And so we revisioned and we looked at it and said, well, what is it that you really want? And she said, what I want most of all is to be present for my son. And I said, what's keeping you from doing that? Well, I have to grow a business. I have to travel. I have to do all these other things. I said, okay, why do you have to? Because sometimes we force ourselves to believe that we have to do things that we don't really have to do. There are millions, literally millions and billions of ways to make money. And let that sink in a minute. There are millions and billions of ways to make money. So just because you were successful in a way at one point and maybe it doesn't match you, or maybe you picked a way that wasn't good for you to begin with, if you go down to your base core, what do I want in life, and own those things first, and then say, okay, how can I make that happen? In her case, we switched up her business model so that she enjoyed speaking, just not as much as she was doing. So she cut that back. And then we built a virtual model for her. And we built a way for her to speak to her prospects that actually made the virtual model more appealing than what she had been doing.
Nice.
She sold her first 5-figure program after that was designed. And we had been only working together for a short while. And she could sell it because she could believe in it fully, right? I mean, because Paul, before that, she was almost talking people out of working with her because she really didn't want to do what she was doing. Deep down, she didn't want to be doing all the traveling, even though she is so amazingly brilliant at what she did. So she had this push-pull going on in her body, and her body was kind of fighting her, right?
Yes.
And now she's in a position where her body's not fighting her. And it's one of my favorite stories because when she first started working with me, her husband was actually against it. She had invested in a lot of different programs, a lot of group programs, mentorships, masterminds, private, she had invested a lot. And he was very anti working with me, not because of me, but because of he felt it was a been there, done that
Yeah.
type of situation. And when she finished her first program, which was 3 months long, I actually got a phone call from him saying, "Thank you for giving me my wife back."
Oh, nice.
And that, that I'm not a relationship coach. That's not what I do. But there are residual positive things that happen in life when you align your business and when you recognize what you've got that's taking you off kilter.
Yeah. Nice. So, Stephanie, we could hang out all day and talk about this. I think we both have that kind of passion, but I know you have other things, and I want to be respectful of our listeners' time. In addition to the great tips you just gave, you talked about an offering you have that's about aligning your money with your life. It's called the Income Accelerator. Talk to us a little bit about how you work with people in that program.
Oh, thank you for asking. The Income Accelerator program is an enhanced VIP day where we get together and we really look at, designing your life, defining and designing your life. What are you really looking to achieve in your overall life? Like I mentioned, whether that's more time on the golf course or more time massaging or more time with family or, whatever it is that you want, more travel, whatever. And we look at what it will really take to make that life appear. There's a money mentor, her name is Georgina Sweeney, that calls that kind of visioning making money meaningful. And it's very different than I want to make 6 figures or I want to make 7 figures, because you actually say, here's what I would do with the money when I made it. And it becomes real. It becomes meaningful to you. And then we go into the strategy part of their work together and say, okay, how are we going to make that happen? What types of things do you have in your repertoire, whether it's products you could make, knowledge, services? What do you have already in your tool bag? And then what things can we dream up? And we balance that with, okay, what type of price point would that be at? And is it fun and filling to deliver? Because there's lots and lots of things. I mean, one of my degrees is computer programming, but I should not be computer programming. I should not be building websites, because I find that I lose life completely when I do, getting too caught up in the nits and gnats of it. So that's something I'm capable of that I really shouldn't do if I want to have the life that I say I want to live. And a lot of people have those types of things going on in their skills and genius and brilliance as well. And so we look at the things that you can deliver that are fun and joyous for you to deliver. And then how can those things be priced? And how can those things be structured within your day so that you have the ability to fully live your life and have a life-loving business that's also profitable? And so I say it's an enhanced VIP day because we do all the visioning and building within that VIP day, but then there's also continued support as you put that into place. Because what I've found with some VIP days is you get really excited. It's like going to conferences, right? You get really excited and I'm going to do this. And then you go back to your office and life happens and, well, stuff doesn't really happen. So it's an enhanced VIP day to give you the support that you need to actually implement what we design in our time together on the VIP day. And it's all virtual.
Nice. So, Stephanie, again, this is a huge topic, and thank you so much for sharing with us your journey, these great tips, how you work with clients. If there was something you were hoping we'd get to in this big topic that's so important, affects so many people's lives right now, but we haven't yet gotten to it, what would that be?
I love that question. And there's, we could get into the nits and gnats of a lot of this.
And a week later, Paul and Stephanie, we're still talking.
Right. Well, and there's a lot of different details that you can get into, but when you start talking about being off kilter, there's so many different reasons for people to be off kilter that it's a challenge to get specifically detailed to say, do this. So what I'd like to reemphasize with everybody listening here today is something that's pretty trite, but something that people really don't practice enough. Be true to you. And if you aren't really listening to your body and to your internal knowing, find somebody that can help you learn how to do that again. because we were all born with that ability, and a lot of us had it conditioned out of us. And when you are able to truly, fully listen to yourself, then solutions for how to get out of whatever situation you're in, that off-kilterness, become a lot more apparent and become a lot more joyous and become a lot more life-fulfilling for you. So I would just really encourage you to practice even just a little bit today of really listening to what you really want. And rather than saying, oh, I can't have that because of this, that, or the other, get a little creative, get a little adventurous. What if I could? What would that look like? And you might be surprised that you come up with solutions today that you had inside of you all along.
Nice. Stephanie, if somebody wants to find out more about you, your work, the Income Accelerator, where would they go?
StephanieCallahan.com is the best place. It's Stephanie, Stephanie, and then Callahan has one L, which makes us a little different from a lot of other Callahans. It's CALAHAN.com. All of my contact information is out there. All my social media stuff is out there. I do not pay other people to be me on social media. So if you're talking to me on social media, it's really me.
I can attest. I've talked to you on social media, enjoyed it very much, and it was really you.
I think we met on Twitter, I think. I'm pretty sure it was Twitter when we met many years ago.
Yeah.
And my contact form is out there. My intake form is out there. If you are at all interested in exploring if the Income Accelerator is right for you, click on the Work With Me button. You can request an intake form that tells me a little bit about your situation. We hop on the phone and have a conversation. I promise you, I can't stand being sold to, so I don't sell. The conversation really is about me understanding a little bit more about you and us deciding together whether it would make sense to move forward in some form of program, whether it's the Income Accelerator or something else that might be a better fit for you. I'm open to those conversations, and I often meet some really fascinating people through those conversations too.
Great. Well, Stephanie, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
That's all the time we have for today's interview. Thank you so much for listening to the Awarepreneurs show. I want to remind you of a couple things. First of all, Stephanie and myself and hundreds of other entrepreneurs who are looking at this intersection of doing conscious business with attention to awareness and positive social impact are part of something called the Awarepreneurs community. We share resources, make referrals, help people find anything from a web designer or a Facebook ad specialist or a graphic designer or social media manager for these kinds of businesses. We also give updates about what's happening in the space, read articles and talk about them together. Lots of good things happen. You can find out more at awarepreneurs.com/community. I also want to give a shout out to our sister podcast. We are building a network of podcasts called the Awarepreneurs Podcast Network, and the second podcast in the network is Reva Padwarton's Dialogue Lab. Reva's focuses on the human side, the relational side of building movements that last and have the impact that people are really longing for, and what contributes to that. She's an incredible interviewer and highly recommend it. You can find out more at awarepreneurs.com/network. So for now, I want to thank you for the good work that you do, and we'll see you next time in another episode.